Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18 plus.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us again on the Seafood Matters podcast. In order to help our podcast series, please press subscribe and share it with family and friends. Today, I'm joined by someone who knows her way around the past, present and future of British fisheries. But you won't catch her overselling herself. Romy Betts grew up in Hessel, studied at Hull and Heriot-Watt University, and has quietly built up a reputation for sharp thinking, careful research, and, as I've learned, writing that sticks with you. She's looked deep into the mackerel fishery, now works on whitefish to crustaceans shift in Bridlington, and her PhD explores the ever-complicated relationship between technology and the people who fish for a living. Stick around if you care about the sea, about coastal towns, or about how change creeps in without asking permission. Hi, Romy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, now, the area you live, it's so steeped in fishing history. You grew up in Hessel, surrounded by the Humber and its history. Was the sea always part of your story, or did that interest come later?
Well, it's a complicated question, really. I think fishing's always sort of been in the background for me, really. My great-granddad was a skipper, like a distant water skipper, and my nana worked in the Bird's Eye fish factory on Hessel Road. So it's always been there in the background. But yeah, it didn't really come to the forefront until I started university, really, and started doing like fisheries management modules at uni and just learning loads of different aspects of the industry that I'd never even considered before. But yeah, like Hull, it's just a very historic city. Like you walk down Hessel Road and it could be the 60s still, really. But my dad would like take me round like the old industrial estate and the docks where everything is abandoned, and we'd like walk around the Lord Line building, which is just in ruins now. But it just always fascinated me just how much history there is and how most people don't really know about it. And yeah, it's just interesting to me.
I have to say that I'm very fond of that area, right? The whole Humber area. Romy, it's interesting when you say that about your history, and you say that your grandfather?
Yeah, my great granddad. Yeah,
Or great granddad was a distant water fisherman, but
it was.
I was always fascinated as a youngster, and fishing news was mainly what we used. But at that time, Hull was always the real big deep sea trawlers, whereas, I'll get this right, there was more boats fishing out of Grimsby, but not so big, so there was bigger landings in Hull. And as a kid, I can remember we'd be fascinated, wanting to wait for the fishing news every week to see somebody breaking record landings and what. It was really exciting times. And then later on in my career, I actually had an office with a joint venture with local guys, one in Hull and one in Grimsby.
Oh, amazing.
So I've got good ties there. My son, who's now in Australia, but
Oh, wow.
he came on board. He was in the company for a while, and he actually had a house outside Hull, and he worked in the Hull office, and then he moved over and worked out at Grimsby. So I know all about the local rivalries between yellow bellies, Yorkies, codheads.
Yeah, it's definitely all still alive and well too. Like, as I said, you go down Hazel Road, I don't know, if you go into any pub on Hazel Road, it'll feel like going back in time, really.
I
It's,
remember after the Cod War, and a lot of the boats were tied up, the guy that I was in partnership with in Hull, he says, "Do you know this, Jim?" He says, "It's so bad here now." He says, "Even if you wanted to do away with yourself, you couldn't, you could drive your car, but you couldn't find enough space to get your car to run it over the edge of the pier because there's that many boats side,
oh,
ships side cover."
says it all, really.
But it was exciting times. I'm maybe preaching to the converted just now, but did you know the auction was very different in Hull to that was anywhere else in the country? They had
Oh, I didn't.
they had a Dutch auction. They started high and come down, and
Ah,
I believe that was the only port in the UK that auctioned their fish that way. The rest were all talking, it's long before electronics that I'm talking about.
yeah. Oh, fascinating.
But it was our fair system. I liked it. So studying in Hull and Harriet Watt, how did these two very different places shape your outlook?
I think in completely different ways, to be honest. Studying at Hull, it sort of felt natural because I'm from here. I've lived here my entire life. It, yeah, going to Hull University, it was easy to sort of get wrapped up in the intricacies, I guess, of like the regional fisheries around here. You know, the Yorkshire fisheries, Bridlington, etc. But going to Harriet Watt, it was like a whole new experience. It was like a whole new dimension to sort of looking at fisheries management that I'd never considered before. Like, for the first time, I've met a lot of people from different countries and just different walks of life altogether that brought different perspectives that I'd never considered. Yeah, it was just interesting. And like, Edinburgh is obviously quite a hub for fishing in general. So it was good to be at the heart of it, really, because here in Hull there's bits, but it's sort of all concentrated in capital cities and things. And yeah, but I definitely think it was a good contrast, really. They're completely different places.
Obviously, when you were away in Harriet Watt, you could have probably gone in any direction. So there must have been a pool to keep you in fishing.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm really interested in like climate change mitigation and stuff. Like, that was my first insight into it, my first way in. And I soon realised that if I wanted to make an actual difference, there was, how do I put this in a nice way? No point going down the Greenpeace route. Instead, I realized that you have to speak to people, and to speak to people, you have to, you have to speak to fishermen. You have to know what they're doing and how they do it and the problems that they're facing. So I decided during my masters to go in and pick modules that would be to do with fisheries management and like the socioeconomic sort of side of it and things like that. And that just led me into fishing technologies, really, because there's a big push for decarbonisation technologies in fisheries today. And yet a lot of fishermen are really resistant to the idea of, being forced to use a new technology or forced to do something different when there's no proof that it's going to help them. So, I just thought it sounded really interesting, and it interests me more than sort of your standard marine biology pursuits would, I guess.
I'm not quite certain if I'm with you all the way on your reference to fishermen and technology, but where I think we are as one, you give them technology, electronics, whatever it may be. If it's a method that they're going to be able to catch more fish, you try them on that one.
Yeah, that seems to be it. Like, if you can prove it works and that they can make money from it, then obviously they're going to use. Why wouldn't they? But
But I think,
yeah,
do you not feel the modern fisherman is changing because they do accept now, and also, when you're saying less emissions and things like that, well, it can have a benefit in maybe cutting their fuel consumption, so there's benefits for them as well, which has got to work both ways.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in order for things to be like effective, in order to have like new technologies and stuff that actually make a difference, yeah, it has to work on both ends. You have to prove that you can still make profits, that it's not going to it's not going to transform the way that you fish and what you're used to and what you enjoy doing, if that makes sense. And I
Totally.
feel like, yeah, I feel like a lot of, or at least the impression I got from current fisheries management measures, was that they don't seem to really consider fishermen enough in that process. So that was basically what I wanted to go and look at, to be honest, was looking at how to help fishermen utilize these new technologies and these new measures to manage your fish stock or whatever, but in a way where they felt like they had the reins on it and it wasn't just being thrust on them and forced upon them for
Yeah.
something that they,
The point that you made about the approach of Greenpeace and the NGOs and bodies like that, personally, I'll have to say that I don't like. And if I'm sure I'm right in saying that Magnus brought a good point up about it in one of our previous podcasts. And they don't seem to have any problem in sort of coming with untruths or something that's very, not accurate.
Exactly. And I feel that it's just sort of shooting yourself in the foot a bit. How can you expect fishermen to trust an organisation like that when they do spread misinformation or just it's not honest, it's not the full picture? Yeah.
I know my experience, which goes back a long time, and it'd be interesting to see because you talk with fishermen. I would be of the firm belief you speak to fishermen about something that makes practical sense and they'll wear it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, during my time at Heriot Watt, I did some interviews with a lot of skippers and fishermen for my dissertation. And even then, just talking to them about new technologies and their opinions on technologies and things, it was really interesting because the narrative for fishermen is that they are, resistant to everything and tied to tradition and things. But that wasn't the case at all. Like everybody I spoke to was happy that if you can prove it works, they'll be happy to try it. But they're just not willing to risk their livelihoods on things that you can't prove work.
Well, not apart from that, but included in that is the fact they don't want to risk their livelihoods, but also there's maybe a crew of 6 or 7 people and they don't want to risk theirs. So they have a
Exactly.
responsibility. But it's always amazed me, and I have to say, yes, I was going to say maybe I didn't choose my words, but I've always been fascinated because my father was a fisherman. I was brought up in fishing communities. Some of my closest friends are fishermen. And it always stood out to me the way that many of them, they maybe weren't big as far as academics were concerned. They didn't come out with hires and O-levels and through school. But you put them in front of some of the most sophisticated electronics and they would work it out.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm fully of the opinion that practical experience is the best you can have. I feel like it goes for the same for scientific research in fisheries. You're going to get more talking to somebody than just sitting and reading a million books on it.
Well, now I like this, the art of writing. Now I've got it from good authority on your writing. How writing helps you think, and why so many technical researchers struggle to tell their story.
I think that writing helps me think by sort of, how do I put this? Like slowing down my brain. I could have 1,000,001 ideas, but to write them down, you need to think about it and form a narrative and figure out what you're saying and what you're trying to put across to other people. And I think that a lot of like technical researchers struggle with that because, especially in science, you're after data and, like cold, hard facts. And that don't really lend itself to writing in a nice way and writing in a way that people are going to be interested in reading it. Like I've read a lot of academic papers that just sound like they were written for a robot to read. Like no normal person is going to pick it up and read it. And I personally think that like I want my work to have use. I want the people that I'm writing about to be able to read it and be able to understand it and enjoy it. So if I could do that, then that's what I want my writing to be like, really.
Yeah, but you can tell me what your views are on this, but I find it fascinating. You get somebody that's maybe public speaking, be it a function or, he's making a speech at a conference or whatever. You type that speech and you'll go over and over it. You write it and you could almost see it without reading it.
Yeah, I don't know. It definitely helps me organize and just sort of, I don't know, get things in order, really. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a big note taker. I take a lot of notes. I have a lot of notebooks. It helps me think. It helps me stay on track. And I think that, yeah, it's a useful skill. And I think a lot of scientists especially don't focus enough on it.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Because I feel like the communication is the most important part. If you're not communicating effectively, what's the point?
When you say communicating, do you mean communicating your brain with your hand or communicating with your colleagues? Or both?
I guess both. Yeah, both. Yeah, it is a bit of both, really.
I take it from that. Would you feel a bit disappointed the fact that writing doesn't seem to be a big thing on the curriculum now in schools?
I think I would, yeah. I think it's definitely scary where we're going in terms of writing and just sort of individuality in writing and things in general with the rise of AI and all this insane stuff. I think it's a really important time to sort of push to write and to, write in your own style and how you think and speak and not just be like everybody else. Definitely a shame.
Oh, that fascinates me. I think that's well done. And please don't stop that. That's brilliant.
Oh, no. Yep.
What big surprises, there must be some, have you found in the history of the mackerel fishery?
Ooh, it's a hard question. Well, it was the first sort of case study I had done that had looked at a historical case of a fishery and this case of like dramatic change in a fishing industry. And to be honest, it really surprised me just how fast everything happened and how fast people took notice of the appearance of mackerel shoals on the southwest coast and how quick people were to capitalise on it and go out of their way to get new gears or sort their boats out to make them ready to be able to go and get as many fish as they could, and how fast the word spread of the shoal's existence, if that makes sense. Like how quick it was for visiting fleets from like Hull and Grimsby and places like that to be down in Cornwall fishing and scooping up quite a lot of the local fishermen's what they assumed would be their catch. But yeah, it fascinated me just how sort of international it was back then, whereas I feel like a lot of people don't really consider older fisheries as an international operation, or at least a lot of things I've read is they write about just English fisheries and just England, whereas even back then, like the impact of Eastern Bloc fleets and other European countries coming, it was obvious, and it's just really interesting to me because I didn't really consider that going into it. I assumed it would either be classic, the stocks decline because of overfishing sort of story, but it's a lot more complicated than that.
And how the story of mackerel helps explain the push and pull of nature and human ambition.
I think, if anything, it just shows how like delicate the balance is between human ambition and nature, if that makes sense. Like these shoals appeared and it was almost instant people going to capitalize on it, to take advantage of it. That obviously is human ambition. It's human nature to want to drive, to succeed and, maintain your livelihood, earn a living. But doing that in exploiting this resource to the utmost, the stocks couldn't take it. There's a limit to nature, if that makes sense. And I think it's really hard to sort of balance human activity, fishing activity, with how nature works, and finding that balance without pushing it and overfishing or not fishing enough, and all of a sudden you can't afford to live. And it's a really hard thing to balance. But in my case studies that I've been doing so far, it seems like people have tried various different methods to sort of deal with this. But overarchingly, the EU seem to have the biggest say in what happened, and that they really, in my opinion, didn't really do a very good job of balancing nature and human ambition, to be honest.
Well, yeah, but what's intrigued me is just with last year there, when we talk about nature, one of the most sophisticated pelagic boats in the fleet from Shetland was down the west coast, and he was watching whales, because for all the sophistication they have on board fish finding, he reckons that he could learn more from watching whales.
Wow. Yeah, to be honest, I'm in two minds about the never-ending benefits of technology. Because I feel like there is a lot of benefit to local knowledge, experience, and you can't get that from fancy piece of equipment that can tell you where a shoal of fish is. I feel like it's still important to have that sort of local knowledge and experience. And I think it's really important that management authorities consider that and make it sort of a big part of how they manage fisheries. Because I don't see a point, really, if you're not paying attention to the people who rely on it.
Absolutely. And, well, that was a recent situation. But one of the things I love doing is looking up in a dark night, and I can pick out all the constellations, the planets, and all the sort of behavior, how if the moon is on its back, if it's or around it, all this kind of things. And that's all things I learned from my father, and they're still relative.
Yeah, it's amazing. To be honest, all the interesting facts my dad has told me, I think, came from his dad and his granddad.
Yeah.
And yeah, it always amazes me anytime I meet fishermen, just the amount of knowledge that they have, and the fact that they don't seem to get that much credit for the amount of knowledge they have.
And do you not feel that when we talk about nature there, fishermen would be the first to say, we work with Mother Nature, not against. We can't afford to work against her.
Yeah, exactly.
Because weather and things like that, they can't. So they do work with nature. Lessons from the past. Are we better at learning from history or it repeating itself?
I think we're definitely better learning from it than repeating it. But I think it's a lot more complicated than you'd assume, if that makes sense. The case studies I've done so far have shown, if nothing else, that how fishermen respond to changes in fisheries are really dynamic. How they respond can change massively depending on the overlying socioeconomic and political and environmental factors, and how that impacts fishermen really affects their decision making and how they choose to operate. And I think that in order to learn from history, we need to have really in-depth studies on fisheries in the past, sort of like how I'm trying to do, to just learn how fishermen behave and understand that each place is unique. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. But I definitely think there's a lot of merit to looking back at older fisheries and how they dealt with changes, whether they were, an environmental change that affected a fish stock or the implementation of steam power. The occupation itself hasn't changed that much over time. It's still, you go to sea, you fish an active resource that you have no control over, really. And in that way, I think that, yeah, there's a lot we can learn from history, I think.
I know that my father used to tell me, well, during the war, he was on a lot of the hull trawlers were used in minesweeping activities. He was on board one, and he was telling me about how, with that trawlers, going back this way, I thought of it when you mentioned steam, because he says they would be going out to sea full of coal, and they would be coming back full of fish. So they had great ballast, and he says they were amazing sea boats. You'd see some of the modern boats, they would be full up, their fish rooms would be full, but they weren't below the waterline. If I could move on to ask you about Bridlington, Romy. Why
Yep.
do you feel Bridlington's fleet have pivoted from whitefish to shellfish?
Again, it is complicated, really. I think that a lot of it was to do with the cod quotas and just how low the cod quotas were. And there's a lot of like evidence from newspapers at the time of like fishermen saying they have to tie up the boats. You know, it's not economical to be able to go out and fish because the fuel costs were too high, and they weren't allowed to catch enough cod to really warrant them even trying. But I think that Bridlington was unique on the Yorkshire coast, really, in being like one of the first around there to start diversifying into shellfish with the like decreasing cod quotas, because all the sort of the habitats around the Bridlington coast are ideal for lobsters and crabs and scallops, and they'd also in the past, like in less devastating declines, like times of hardship in like the 70s and stuff, they'd previously diversified to shellfish before, so they knew that it was going to see them through. It was a stable stock, and it had been for years. And a lot of the skippers were really active in sort of shellfish conservation. Like they took part in shellfish, like lobster tagging studies and things to up the stock numbers. And this was from like the mid-70s. So they're definitely being active, I think, in future-proofing, even if at the time they maybe didn't consider it as future-proofing. But it does, yeah, it seems like they were in an ideal position, really, to transition to shellfish compared to all the other ports in the area. They didn't have as many distant water trawlers, so when the cod wars happened and all the distant water fishing opportunities were lost, they didn't lose out as badly as the other ports like Scarborough and Whitby and Hull, obviously. Yeah, and they had like a lot of shellfish fishermen anyway. I think by the mid-70s, it was already the third top shellfish port in the country. So they were pretty set up for it, really. And I think that they definitely got lucky with accessing like high value markets in Europe and stuff for lobster that allowed them to sort of, it was a lifeline in the 1990s where everything else was declining.
There's obviously winners and losers. How did that shift hit the community, the economy, and the ecosystem?
I think some people definitely lost out with like the loss of whitefish stocks and cod fishing, because like there was a lot of fishermen there that had just interest in trawling. Like Bridlington trawlers, they owned quite a lot of trawling boats that would either go out into the North Sea or in like inshore trawling. So they definitely lost out there. But I would say that the impacts weren't as bad as like at Scarborough and Whitby, as I said, because they were used to fishing inshore and like middle distance waters as opposed to travelling long distances. I think a lot of their idea of long distance was going up to Scotland rather than out to Iceland. And yeah, I think the community, the impacts have been sort of dynamic, I'd say. Overall, I think that they seem to have fared quite well. Now they're the top lobster port in the country, and the entire fleet seems dedicated to shellfish fishing and shellfish potting. And they've definitely like built a massive market, and ecologically, I think that it's helped the cod stocks recover in the North Sea. I know that Seafish has been saying that the cod stocks are in recovery, which is good. And obviously they've been an active participant in like lobster conservation and things since the 70s. So the lobster stocks are also pretty good. But yeah, I think in terms of winners and losers, really, I guess there's just a risk of concentrating too much on shellfish and then not having an alternative if things do go bad. If something goes wrong, if there's a disease outbreak or I don't know, some weather event that affects the shellfish stocks, they might not have an alternative to fall back on. So I think that is a potential loss. But at the minute, they seem to be doing quite well. So Brexit has definitely had its effect.
And is there any mobile fishing, whitefish?
I don't think there is anymore. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the last trawlers were in like the early 2000s, and since then it has been a shellfish fishery through and through.
All static gear.
I believe so, yeah. Yeah.
Are we seeing the natural evolution of the industry or the start of something more worrying, do you think?
I think it's an interesting question because I think it could quite easily be both, depending on how you look at it. I think it's really easy to look at it in a really pessimistic way and assume that this is the end of, traditional fishing practices in favour of these insanely technologically efficient, like mega trawlers and all this sort of stuff. But I think it's more just the natural evolution of the industry. I think looking through my case studies and like the research I've done so far, like reading about the start of the fishing industry in this country and how it's developed, even throughout all of these mad technological innovations like steam power, motorization, etc., the traditional methods have remained and the fishermen have remained, and you still have cobbles in Bridlington and you still have small scale fishermen elsewhere that I don't think they'll go anywhere unless they're forced out, which they shouldn't be. But I hope they don't go anywhere, and I hope that like fisheries management measures nowadays are trying to they make an effort to maintain traditional fishing methods because I think they're quite important.
The danger.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
You find when things are like that is the infrastructure. Just say boats do start to find a bit of fish again. Can they come ashore and land them there? Is there transport? Is there ice making? Can they get ice? Can they get engineers? Electronics? They need an infrastructure. And
Exactly.
that's the danger, that they can't get that. So they have to go elsewhere or...
Yeah, I agree. I think there should definitely be more investment and support for, your smaller scale ports. I remember back in Edinburgh, I was speaking to a skipper from the Shetland Islands, and he was saying about how their main issue was transporting the catch back for processing and everything else. And no matter how much fish they caught, it was dependent on being able to transport it. So yeah, I think in order to stop these smaller ports being lost and stop the sort of consolidation of it to a few large ports where everything is really concentrated, you need to invest in the infrastructure of these places and, make it so you don't have to go out of your way to transport fish to a city. Make it easy and doable. Yeah.
Am I right in saying, well, they're still trying, and I know that I've done a recent podcast with Paul Gilroy. He's in the Magpie restaurant in Whitby, and they're doing that fish and chips, festival and things, and almost saying to the public and the industry, look, we're here and we're still here, which I think is fantastic. It seems like a great thing to do.
I agree. I think like celebrations of like fishing heritage and stuff are really important, and just telling people that fishing isn't a like a vintage activity. It still happens. Like people still rely on it for their life. Yeah. Like here in Hull, we have a lot of like plays and things, you know, like about the fishing industry of the 60s and 70s. And we have a heritage centre. And I think even since that heritage centre's opened, the amount of people that have learnt more about our history and the fishing industry in general, and it's opened a lot of people's eyes when I think a lot of people weren't really aware of our history. And yeah, I think it's just really important to get people to notice and to understand how it works, really, and understand where their food comes from.
Well, I have to say personally, I think that's so important. And as I said to you earlier, I can remember as a kid, it was just so exciting times. And what ship was going to beat the record that his mates set the previous trip? And it was just brilliant, great times. And I remember by doing a lot of business in the Humber, I got a real insight from both sides of the Humber, let's say, on the Cod War. And I've now got friends and done a lot of business in Iceland, and I heard the Icelandic point of view and their slant towards it. And I don't know how much of the truth we were told throughout it, because the Icelanders were saying, you know, I know that my father, I can remember him saying to us, our Navy shouldn't be there at Iceland. We should be taking a leaf out of their book and putting our Navy to our 200-mile limit and stop foreign boats coming into our waters. And the Icelanders were saying, if you listen to some of the BBC News bulletins, it was the Icelandic gunboats. He says there were wooden boats. He says they couldn't stand up to a missile-carrying cruiser from the British Navy. And then hearing from the Humber how the people in the industry, the merchants, the fishermen, the companies who trawl owners and that, they were saying to the government, look, they are offering us Iceland are offering us a quota. He says, our fleet are aging and they're not the capabilities they had. Take the quota. He says, we won't even be able to catch it. And the politicians' view is no small island in the north is going to tell Britain what we were Britain. Nobody's going to tell us. Nobody's going to dictate to us. So what happened? We lost a lot.
Yeah.
So there's a lot.
You don't want to get me started on politics.
Well, the way you answered that, yes, I do.
I do think it is quite a big problem, just generally, that governments don't seem to pay that much attention, really. Or they'll say they do and then don't. And I think it comes from, I don't know. They don't grow up around fishing. They don't grow up in places where people rely on it. And you grow up where this is foreign to you and you don't understand it or understand the priorities of the people involved.
Well, our fear now is that between politicians and the people coming up with the legislation, we see them as desk sailors. No, they've never been in a fishing boat in their life, and they're coming up telling a fisherman, this is what you do and this is what you have to do. And there's no practical sense to it.
It does.
Totally. And I was just reading an article today, I think it was maybe, this morning in one of the newspapers. And when you look at it, and the fear is that our government are going to increase the quota for some of the EU countries because they hope they're wanting to get contracts for arms for Ukraine. And you just look at that and you think, what chance have we got? Because we don't come anywhere close to that, unfortunately.
No. Again, like it was the same with the cod wars. Really, that was NATO and things, and yeah, it's just like pardon the pun. It's as if we're small fish and in a very big pond. But yeah, I think that the government definitely needs to listen to fishermen more. 100%.
Definitely, definitely. Your PhD, what pulled you towards the question of tech in fisheries?
Well, as I said, like I have strong feelings on like stopping climate change and things, and got into like decarbonisation technologies and stuff with the fishing industry as my dissertation for my masters. But to be honest, like I mostly just found it interesting that people's responses to new technologies aren't always as you'd expect. Like people aren't as enthusiastic to try something all the time, even if I don't know, on paper it seems to be successful. And I thought I don't know, I thought it was interesting that people were not just sold on the idea of technology fixing all of their problems, which a lot of people are. And I would say that the government and things are a lot more of that belief than the average fisherman is. But yeah, I just became interested in like why fishermen might be resistant to the like implementation of new technologies and how to make them more up for it, I guess, in a way that's not going to impact them negatively.
It's strange hearing you say that. Now, maybe you might say I'm having the wrong end of the stick, but when we talk about technology, maybe you're talking about in different ways, but I see fishing and technology. As I said earlier, you put a instrument in a wheelhouse of a boat, and a fisherman has got a way around it in 10 minutes. So, and I see that as technology. Are you maybe thinking of it in other aspects?
I guess I would agree that is also a technology. I don't know how to explain it really. I think there's different types of technologies that I'm interested in, because a lot of technology can be like that. You can implement it on a boat and then it's sort of intuitive, whereas other types are really disruptive and if implemented, it transform the way that you fished or transform how you operate or how you process your catch or whatever else. And I think it interests me most, like understanding how to implement those technologies that cause the greatest changes, positive changes, hopefully. Like,
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
lowering emissions and things, but do like fundamentally alter how the fishery works. And I think for that, there's a lot of resistance because people, I mean, it's a risky industry in itself. You don't want to take extra risks. Whereas I think I'm interested in finding a way to prove to fishermen that that it's worth taking that risk and it's not going to put them in danger if they do.
That makes sense. But is traditional fisheries coexist with modern tech? Or is it a case of adapt or die?
I think it's definitely, they can coexist. I would hope it wouldn't be adapt or die, because throughout history it doesn't seem to have been that way, at least in my opinion. I feel like, as I said, despite like all these mad technological innovations and all these new being able to fish further and things, the traditional methods have remained. You still have cobbles, you still have all these different small subsistence fisheries. And I think they will continue to exist. And I hope that like the government will support them to continue existing, because I think it's important that they do. And I think that for a lot of people, these traditional methods is more than just a way to make money. It's like, it's their lifestyle, it's their livelihood, it's their heritage, and it's important the same way that I don't know, Hull having a fishing industry in its history is important to me. Yeah, I think it's definitely, they should be able to coexist with modern technology. I think that there should be efforts made to sort of promote the implementation of technologies in these traditional methods in a way that won't just interrupt how they operate, but could help them or enhance the way that they fish or something like that.
Well, yeah, but I suppose, would you not say, with any industry, no matter what it is, if you don't keep up to date, you're left behind?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that. I think that it's definitely happened. A lot of people have lost their livelihoods. Like in Cornwall, for example, a lot of like handline fishermen didn't stand a chance against like the ginormous like factory ships, factory trawlers that would come in and just sweep the grounds clean. But I also think that there's I don't know, it seems there are efforts made to preserve these traditional methods. Like in Bridlington, they have like a cobble festival where each year they'll come out and, you know, they'll have a preserved cobble from like the 1920s and they'll parade it around and show the community and things. And I think it's important to do that. I think, you know, it's important to connect to your history of where you came from and things. And I think there's room for that while making the industry more efficient and technologically, you know, advanced and things like that.
I like your style because I do feel, listening to you, you're very much, yes, we can see the advantage in technology, but you don't want to forget the past.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No,
I think it's,
that comes across loud and clear.
yeah,
Credit
no, I
to
think
you.
it's really important.
It's good. And the undercurrents of self-doubt in both science and fishing, why is it so common?
I think it's quite common because both in science and in fishing, I think you deal with a lot of uncertainty. Like, you go out to fish, you don't know, you could set everything up perfectly and still come back with nothing. If the stocks aren't there, if the fish aren't there, you're not going to get anything. And I think that's the same with science. You know, you can set up a perfect experiment and it could still go terribly wrong. And I just think there's a lot of uncertainty because of that. You don't know what, you can't predict really. Each day is different. And with that comes self-doubt, sadly. And I definitely don't think the current like political climate helps with that uncertainty and self-doubt, because it sort of seems like you're fighting to get ahead rather than being helped.
Are you hands-on with fishermen yourself?
Not at the minute. I've done some interviews with them in the past, and I'm heading to Brid in the next few weeks to do some more. But no, ideally I'd love to be. I want to be out there on the boats and things, but yeah, in Hull there ain't really much for it. So it's going to be a trip to Bridlington, I think, to the office that Magnus is currently in.
Hey, don't backpedal now. I've picked up and I thought, the Hull coming out and you mentioned Brid. So don't start coming now with something posh like Bridlington.
Oh, no, never.
What's the saying? You can take the girl out the Hull, but you can't pick
Not the
Hull.
whole of the girl. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice as well. Everybody mentions it.
Yeah, but I enjoy hearing it because I have such good, fond memories of Hull in the past.
good.
So no, I enjoy it. Handling imposter syndrome in a world obsessed with certainty.
This is a difficult one. I struggle with imposter syndrome quite a bit, personally. I think it's normal, to be honest, especially in things like science and fishing. It's the amount of uncertainty. How can you really be certain? You can't be. And especially when, as you say, the world is obsessed with certainty. You know,
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
your fisheries management measures are all about certainty, about reaching a certain amount of fish or reaching a certain curve on a graph or whatever. And I don't know, I try and see imposter syndrome as helpful in a way because it makes me double check and second guess and ask loads of extra questions that I probably wouldn't otherwise. And I think it's helped quite a bit with asking the questions of my research that I hadn't considered before and finding interesting stuff out as a result. Yeah.
I think you're doing wonderful. I could see the passion. When the arms started going up, I thought, wow, I could see the passion.
I could have done this the way through, but
Brilliant, brilliant. Why curiosity beats confidence when it comes to real progress?
I think I may be biased because I'm not the most confident of people, but I think when you're very confident, you sort of assume you have all the answers and you don't go checking for anything else, if that makes sense. Like, whereas curiosity has sent me, down loads of rabbit holes, researching loads of interesting stuff, and I found case studies to look at from it. I found like other avenues that I wouldn't have considered, especially with like the fishing industry. It's really complex. Everything changes all the time. So it's better to be curious rather than confident that you've got everything right, I think.
I think it's just there's a happy medium.
Yeah.
You have to feel confident. On looking ahead, Brexit quota, changing seas, what's next for the UK coastal fleets?
To be honest, I think it's quite hard to predict with everything happening at the minute. Everything feels very uncertain. I think that like the key to surviving the next like few decades will probably just be being as flexible as you can be. I mean, like I said earlier with the Bridlington fishers, it's all well and good having a productive fishery, but if you've got nothing to fall back on, what are you going to do if something goes wrong? And I feel like the best way to sort of safeguard for the future is to diversify your catch. Like, make sure you have backups and make sure you can sort of sustain yourself without relying on just one stock or one market. Because as we're seeing with Brexit, you can lose those markets quite quickly or they can change quite quickly and you don't know, you can't predict it. So yeah, it's a hard thing to predict, but I like to be optimistic.
Well, it's good to keep an optimistic view, but it's hard as well because your area with no demersal fishing, the longer that lasts, the harder it is to get it back. But from a positive point of view, the area you're in, geographical area, within a small radius, you've got millions of people. It's really quite sad to see how it has gone to that stage because there must be something there.
It is it's really sad. I think my sort of pipe dream would be for a fishing industry to return to Hull, ideally. That would be great, but whether it will ever happen is another thing. But yeah, I think it's quite easy to be pessimistic about the future of the fishing industry and stuff, but I think there is optimism. I think that definitely I've met younger people that are interested in joining the industry and getting a foot in the door, per se, and I think that's a good sign, if nothing else, that young people are wanting to start fishing.
Your view, what you mentioned there on fishing industry and returning to Hull, just remember, I don't know what your sporting interests are, but Rory McIlroy just recently winning the Masters at Augusta, and what's in his speech? You believe in your dreams.
I do. Hopefully it will happen.
Absolutely. I just thought that was a fantastic thing to say for young people. Believe in your dreams.
I agree.
The more you believe in them, better the chance that they are going to come to reality.
Definitely.
And local knowledge versus top-down policy, who really knows best?
I think it's a hard one. I think both are really useful, but I think that
Don't worry, your great-granddad's no listening to you.
I honestly think that the knowledge of fishermen is like, you can't get it elsewhere. It's experience. It's sometimes decades and decades of experience that I think I said this earlier, you're not going to get that from picking up a book or sitting in a lecture or even talking to fishermen. You can't get the full sort of story, the full idea. So I think like that local knowledge, especially on like the intricacies of like fishing grounds or how the stock behaves, things like that. Your management authorities don't know this stuff really. And even if they did, it would come from the fishermen. So I think that local knowledge is more important really. But I think that top-down policy has its place. And rather than top-down, I think fishermen should just be consulted from the start and have like a really significant role to play in creating policy and management measures. Because otherwise, I mean, as we've seen in the past, I think a lot of management measures don't really consider the fishermen, or they consider the stock in itself and the health of the fish stock, and not the health of the fishing community and how they're doing and if they can live, if they can afford to pay the rent or whatever. And yeah, I personally think local knowledge is the way to go. I think it's definitely worth listening to, and it should be a priority to listen to it.
You know, what you're mentioning there about listening and communicating, fisheries scientist from Iceland who I'm friendly with, he's retired now, and he says that when he was working, they would always be going out on the trawlers and doing their surveys and counts and figures. And he says then they decided they're going to buy their own ships. And the way he put it, we don't like going out in dirty trawlers, so we're going to have our own nice new ships. So that's the view they had. And that's what happens now. But he's retired now, but he feels in Iceland that's the biggest mistake they ever made, because actually what it created was it took fishermen and scientists apart.
Yeah, I think it's definitely hard to get the balance right, especially because a lot of scientists, I think they don't grow up around fishing, or they don't grow up associated with fishermen and that sort of world. So it's a bit foreign to them, if that makes sense. And a lot of the sort of policies and stuff that get made don't consider the sort of intricacies of a specific fishery or whatever. And I think it is very easy to sort of, for fishermen, for the fishing community and scientists to drift apart, because I think there's sort of a lack of trust there a little bit. Yeah. And
100%.
I don't blame fishermen at all for it. I think it's completely the natural response. It's been decades of being ignored and being proven right when management measures don't work. And I think it's sort of hard to mend that trust, but I also think it needs to be done. And I would hope that, I don't know, myself and people like me who are trying to, talk to fishermen, make sure their voices are heard, that we can sort of blend the lines of industry and science and make it a more sort of, a nicer conversation, a more welcoming environment where people don't feel like they have to fight or argue for the voice to be heard.
Do you not feel, from going Jon Christensen's point in Iceland, do you not feel that could be more harmonious if they were out in a trawler together?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. It's definitely a difficult one. I'm not too sure.
Yeah. Well, we'll put it in a slightly different way. If you could change one thing about the way we manage fisheries today, what would it be? One thing.
Ooh, I think that fishermen should just be consulted, spoken to at every stage of the management, of like the creation of the legislation. I think that there shouldn't be an afterthought. I think that there needs to be more than just sort of stakeholder consultation groups. I think that there needs to be people like on site, at the harbours, communicating day to day with the fishermen, and just sort of a more holistic approach. Not to sound a bit hippie, but it's definitely better than what has been happening in the past, and the fact that there's been a lot of shortcomings with management measures in the past. So yeah, I think I'd just change it to listen to fishermen more, listen to their voices more, and include their suggestions
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Don't just throw them to a side because you assume that they're after increased profit. They know the stocks and everything, and they should just be listened to more, I think. Yeah.
Very good answer. Thank you. That's excellent. I'm going to test your cooking skills now, your culinary skills. If you had to cook a seafood dish now, or just what's in your fridge, what would that be?
This is a bit of an awkward question because I don't eat fish. I'm vegan, but I will say that real quietly. But one of the meals I miss the most is, and this can sound real simple, but smoked haddock, specifically the yellow smoked haddock with a poached egg on top, is what I cook myself, I think.
I think we're editing a bit there.
I saw the question and didn't want to say to it earlier.
I have to say I respect your honesty.
Oh no, I'm all about other people eating it.
What's your favourite boat name?
Also a hard question. A favourite doesn't really spring to mind, but one does spring to mind when I was at Heriot Watt and we were doing field work on the Orkney Islands. And despite being like hundreds of miles away from home, I was walking along the little harbour and saw a boat that was called Humber, and it just it reminded me of home. It was nice. It sticks in my head. I don't know why.
Absolutely, quite right. That's a good reason, a good answer, a good reason why. One of the things that fascinates me over the years, if you're talking to fishermen, and if they're really passionate about their boat, or vice versa, they're not the case. When they're passionate about their boat and they really like it, they refer to it as she. If they're not so confident in it and not like it so much, it's either it or her. Yeah, no, that's one that always fascinates me. If you hear a fisherman, you Romy, you test it out. You listen to fishermen in the pier. Which book or article do you think everyone in the fishery industry should read?
I think one that I found really interesting and I think opened my eyes to sort of a lot of different aspects of the fishing industry I'd not thought about before was Beyond Trawler Town by Jo Byrne. She also did a PhD at the Hull Uni. But it sort of takes a deep dive into the decline of Hull's fishing industry and how people sort of remade their identities and discovered new values and things after the traditional fishing opportunities had gone. It's just really interesting. It's like an oral history sort of account of what was happening back then and people's memories with it and experiences and how fishermen responded. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because before I read that, a lot of the studies I had read had painted fishermen as like, I don't know, the industry is in decline, stagnation, that they're sort of just sat waiting for their industry to die. Whereas this, it was different. It was interesting. It showed that there was still some sort of life despite everything, all what they knew falling apart, really. Yeah, it was interesting.
Sorry, Romy, that's fascinating. I've not read that book. Can you tell me the name of it again?
It's Beyond Trawler Town by Jo Byrne.
Trawler Town by Jo Byrne.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, that's
okay.
Oh, here you go. That's definitely one I'll be getting. One word to describe the future of British fisheries.
Resilient. I think that's the word I would choose.
Okay.
I would hope you were.
Yeah. No, very good. Where can people see what you do and follow you online?
I have a LinkedIn that's just under my name, Romy Betts. That's about it at the minute, to be honest. I did have a Twitter, but I've since deleted it because of what things I like at the minute. So yeah, just a LinkedIn really.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I think we maybe just fold up, Romy, and I would just like to thank you because I think you've come across really, really well. And
Oh, good.
I like so much about your way, your passion, your interest, I don't mean it, I want to be very careful the way I say it, but you're young, you're into technology, but you certainly have a good thought of the past. So that's a good mix. And that's,
Oh, good.
I think that gives you a great strength and good luck with your future.
Thank you.
And I'll certainly be one that's watching you. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been really good. Thank you.
It's excellent. Thank you.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.